It's time to get ironic with the best in slot LMG. Hope you enjoy. Right, first of all, let's discuss the topic of the ironic part of LMGs. And the reason this is ironic is just the simple fact of the best in slot LMGs are not actually LMGs in real life. The L86 is classed as a light support weapon. It's actually just basically a very big AR. And despite what some Ukrainians are trying to tell me, RPK literally does, it's got a full word. I'm not Ukrainian, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but the full word, which is abbreviated to RPK, literally does translate to LMG. However, just because you call a car a plane doesn't make the car a plane. It is still technically an assault rifle because it has a switch fire mode. By definition, LMGs do not have a switch fire mode. By switch fire mode, I mean you can go single shot, burst fire, or just pull the trigger until either you're dead, the enemy's dead, or you run out of bullets. So, because RPK and the L86 have a switch fire mode, they're not LMGs. It's that simple. Second point, with LMGs, this gets a lot of flack and confusion, and I've gone over this in other videos. The third attribute on LMGs, what should it be? What is technically best in slot? Well, this depends entirely on your build and what you're aiming to do with it. Now, the three contenders are damage to armor, damage to health, and rate of fire. Now, if you are running a solo build and your main weapon is an LMG, like it's 90% of the time you're going to be using an LMG, damage to health is actually best in slot. The reason for this is you take like a barely 2% DPS decrease against armored targets, but against health targets you get like an 8% DPS increase, due to the fact that chungers and warhounds are a big problem, and LMGs really do struggle against these due to either having a really high fire rate but very low damage, or very high damage but a low fire rate. Getting damage to health on there in terms of open world and mission play is going to be your best in slot for solo DPS builds in terms of LMGs. The second best in slot, if your LMG is your support weapon, or if you're playing something like Heartbreaker or Strikers, a gear set which requires you to build up stacks, rate of fire is then best in slot. Damage to armor is only best in slot on one build, and that is a build that you are using Carnage on, which is Perfect Sadist. And the reason for this isn't because it actually helps the LMG, it helps the bleed ticks. Bleed scales with damage to armor. So in short, depending on how you want to use it, your best in slot role on the majority of the top tier LMG builds is actually going to be rate of fire. On high-end builds, it's going to be damage to health, and unless you're running a bleed build, don't worry about damage to armor. Just to give a visual representation, at the top, against a health target, we have damage to health, obviously, and then against armor or health targets, you then have rate of fire. Against armor targets, you have damage to armor. Against armor targets, you then get damage to health again, and then against health targets, you then get damage to armor. In total, there's about a 12% difference between each of these roles, with damage to armor securing the bottom slot, damage to health against health targets securing the top, and there's a middling group of damage to health against armor and damage to armor against health. However, rate of fire is securely in the top. The difference between damage to health and damage to armor respectively against your standard enemy is only going to be about 2%. So you're going to lose 2% damage to make up about 8% when you really want it. But still, play your way. I would recommend 9 times out of 10 rate of fire. If not, damage to health. The only time I roll damage to armor on an LMG is that bloody Carnage weapon. Anyway, let's crack on with the builds. Up first with 60% crit chance and roughly 211 critical hit damage with damage to health on the LMG is this build. The reason it's a questionable crit damage is just simply because we're using strained. So I've averaged it out at 25%. So on average you'll have 211% critical hit damage. This build does work really well as a standard DPS. However, you're running an LMG with no weapon handling, you will feel it, and there does become the slight problem of you basically being forced to main cover with perfect glass cannon with what is probably very bad weapon handling. Then to solve the weapon handling issue, we have this build. Again, it's basically got the same stats, but we're missing 15% headshot from 3-piece Prov. And we are also missing perfect glass cannon, so we're running normal glass cannon here, which is a drop in our DPS, but this has 10% weapon handling on it. A lot of people won't see the benefit to this. It's not really there for the reload, as it's not really going to give you that much, but it really does help out with the accuracy and the stability of the LMG itself. And in terms of DPS, it is actually pretty damn close. I personally am in favour of running the 2-piece Petrov for the 10% weapon handling. Some of you will probably get along with not having the 10% weapon handling, but it's entirely up to you. There is one big flaw with both of these builds though, and that is just the simple fact of, although their DPS is very good, it's not high enough to negate the suppressed mechanic, which is the big overarching problem with all LMG builds. So just to have a look at their DPS, as you can see, the top one is 3-piece Providence defense, and then the bottom one is the one where we introduce 2-piece Petrov. We are dropping between 6 and 8%, which isn't that much considering hopefully we're going to be landing a few more shots. Anyway, all builds from here on in will be compared to the 3-piece Providence. Some go up, some go down. However, I like to view LMGs as more of a utility, so let's just have a look. Up next we have a weird spotter variant, Walker Harris mask, Cheska backpack, a unicorn closer, the named Uzina chest for perfect spotter. As you can see, we are running the linked laser pointer, contractor's gloves, Grupo holster, and we're also running Sawyer's knees. Although this build is very damaging and very powerful, you've got a lot of upfront damage, there's no stacks to build up, you're not running strained. The issue with it is, one, the critical hit damage. You've lost like over 50% crit damage. And 2, you're completely reliant on basically staying stationary to maintain your Sawyer's knees buff. In terms of DPS, we have dropped 6 to 8%, and this is purely just due to a huge loss in our critical hit damage. Although we are rocking more multipliers, we've lost just a little bit too much in the crit damage department. Up next is a unique one. We're using Blue Screen, Vial, 4-piece Negotiators, Seska, 59 crit chance, 165% critical hit damage. Where you actually lose a lot of single target damage, you do make up for it for the simple fact you're hitting up to 3 enemies at one time. However, you do kind of end up relying on the Vial proc as well as the Blue Screen proc. Not for overall damage, just you will be suppressing a lot of things. The only way to get them out of cover is switching fire to something else, getting the kill, proccing Vial as well as Blue Screen. This will knock them out of cover. That is simply it. Now, although this looks like we've lost a lot of damage, 44 to 43%, please do remember that 1, I've not calculated in Vial proccing on any enemies at all. And I've also not calculated in the simple fact that Negotiator is able to hit 3 enemies at one time. So this is just single target without a Vial proc. Once you've got everything up and running, you'll be surprised how much damage this can actually do. And the reason I've not done it with Vial proc as well as hitting 3 enemies at one time is because I actually have no idea how. Tell no one. Now that is going to do it for part 1. The reason this probably had less builds in it is just simply due to the fact that you have to explain the attribute roles at the beginning, and then there's the little tidbit of the best in slot LMGs not actually being LMGs, which is quite weird. Now I do want to end, because I've still got like a minute left on this recording, by saying that I know a lot of people have always thought the MG5 or the infantry MG5 to be the best in slot LMG, and at one point it was the best in slot LMG. LMGs actually haven't really been stat changed, nerfed. They got nerfed with the use of the suppress mechanic. In terms of stats, they've actually really not changed. The only LMG that did get nerfed was the RPK, because that was mathematically best in slot. I've got no idea where the MG5 being the highest DPS LMG actually came from, but at no point has it actually ever been the highest DPS LMG. I don't know, it's weird. It's always been a toss-up between the L86 and the RPK. Aside from that, we have New Reliable, which is the named RPK, simply just due to the weapon handling. Sure, we lose a bit of damage on the actual upfront side because we don't have a damage talent, but the handling really does make a difference. And then there's that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Pestilence. This is only best in slot, quote end quote, simply due to the fact that after you've done enough damage, if you do suppress the target while they're hiding in cover, you can still damage them by use of the debuff. This is more of a quality of life best in slot, not actual DPS best in slot. And other than that, we have the blue screen. Feel free to change up a few pieces as you wish. Sawyer's knees are a weird hidden gem, but you have to keep the buff up. In the meantime, have fun, good luck, don't die, it's bad for the health.